At Christmas dinner, my son shoved me and said, "That seat's for my father-in-law. Get out." I fell in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that, later that night, I'd change his life forever. "This seat belongs to my father-in-law. Get out." My son Marcus pushed me, not hard enough to leave a bruise but hard enough to make his point, hard enough that I stumbled backward and fell, my 62-year-old knees buckling under me, my hip hitting the hardwood floor in the dining room of the house I'd helped him buy with a $75,000 down payment 3 years ago when he'd married Claire Ashford and suddenly needed to live in a neighborhood that matched her family's expectations. Christmas dinner, December 25, 2023, at 6:47 p.m., according to the grandfather clock in the corner that I'd given him as a wedding present because it had belonged to his mother, my late wife Sarah, who died of cancer when Marcus was 12 and who would have been horrified to see her son treating me like hired help in front of 20 family members who all suddenly found their plates very interesting and refused to make eye contact with the old man on the floor. The table was set with the china I'd bought, service for $24, Lennox, $3,200 that I'd put on my credit card last year because Claire had mentioned offhand that real families used matching dishes for holidays, and Marcus had looked at me with that expression that meant he needed me to solve a problem he was too proud to ask for help with. The chandelier above us, $4,800, installed last spring, cast warm light over everyone's carefully composed faces. Claire's parents, Richard and Margaret Ashford, sitting at the far end, looking like they'd just watched a servant trip. Claire herself, with one hand over her mouth, in performative shock that didn't quite reach her eyes. Marcus standing over me with his jaw set in that expression I recognized from when he was 8 and had broken my laptop, but was determined not to apologize because apologizing meant admitting he'd done something wrong. Nobody helped me up. Not Claire's sister Jennifer or her husband Todd. Not Marcus's college friends David and Ryan, who'd eaten at my table dozens of times. Not Claire's mother Margaret, who I'd driven to the airport twice this year when her own car was in the shop. Not Richard Ashford, who stood across the room near the fireplace with a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, 30-year-old Macallan that I'd brought as a gift, watching me with the faint smirk of a man who'd just won a territorial dispute he hadn't known he was fighting. I got up slowly, my knee throbbing where it had hit the floor, my hip sending sharp signals that I was going to feel this tomorrow, and probably for a week after. "Sorry," I muttered, because that's what you say when you've been pushed down in your own son's house, when you've become the problem that needs to be managed, when you're 62 years old and suddenly realizing that the family you built doesn't see you as family anymore, but as an obligation that costs money and takes up space. Marcus didn't look at me. He pulled out the chair, the head of the table, the seat I'd occupied at every holiday meal since they'd moved into this house, and gestured for Richard to sit. Richard did, settling into the cushion with the satisfaction of a king claiming a throne, and conversation resumed around us like I hadn't just been publicly humiliated, like the sound of my body hitting the floor wasn't still echoing in the sudden too bright room. Claire leaned toward her mother and whispered something I couldn't hear but could read in the slight upturn of Margaret's mouth, the way both their shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. I stood there for a moment longer, waiting for Marcus to acknowledge what had just happened, to offer some explanation or apology, or even just meet my eyes, but he was busy serving Richard the prime rib I'd paid for, $340 at Whole Foods because Claire had insisted on organic, grass-fed, the kind that came with certificates of origin. I ate dinner at the kids' table, literally, in the corner of the living room with my 6-year-old grandson Tyler, who kept asking me why I wasn't sitting with the grown-ups and why Grandpa Marcus had pushed me. Questions I answered with, "It's complicated," and "Sometimes adults make mistakes," while I cut his turkey into small pieces and tried not to look at the main table where Richard was holding court, telling some story about a development deal in Arizona that had everyone nodding along like he was dispensing wisdom instead of bragging. I'm Robert Mitchell, 62 years old, retired civil engineer who spent 40 years designing water treatment systems for municipalities across the Midwest. Widower since 2007 when Sarah died after 18 months of fighting breast cancer that started in her left breast and spread to her lymph nodes and then her bones until the oncologist at Northwestern Memorial finally admitted there was nothing left to try. I raised Marcus alone after that, drove him to school every morning, learned to cook meals that weren't microwave dinners, attended every parent-teacher conference and baseball game and high school graduation ceremony, paid for his mechanical engineering degree at University of Illinois, paid for his wedding to Claire at a vineyard in Napa Valley that cost $85,000, including my airfare and suit rental, paid the $75,000 down payment on this house in Oak Park when they'd decided renting was throwing money away, and they needed to build equity. Last year, Marcus married Claire Ashford, and everything changed. Her family had money, old money, the kind that came from her great-grandfather's steel manufacturing business and had been carefully family invested through 3 generations of trusts and real estate holdings. Richard owned Ashford Development Company, drove a Mercedes S-Class, lived in a house in Kenilworth that had its own name, Ashford Manor, according to the plaque by the gate, and looked at me like I was staff who'd wandered into the family quarters by mistake. The kind of man who talked about legacy and building generational wealth while checking his Rolex during conversations he considered beneath him. After dessert, tiramisu from an Italian bakery in the city, $180 for 2 cakes. Marcus cornered me in the kitchen while I was washing dishes because Claire didn't believe in using the dishwasher for good china, and everyone else had wandered into the living room for coffee and cognac. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," he said, and his tone was the one he used for business, the voice that meant this wasn't a conversation, but a presentation I was expected to agree with. "What is it?" I asked, scrubbing at a wine stain on a plate that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. "Claire and I are expanding the business. We're going into development, commercial properties, multifamily housing, the kind of projects Richard's company specializes in. We need capital to get started." Marcus had quit his engineering job 6 months ago to pursue entrepreneurship, which, as far as I could tell, meant having a lot of lunch meetings and talking about disruption and market opportunities without actually producing anything you could touch. My stomach dropped. "How much?" $200,000. "Richard's putting in 300. We just need you to match his commitment level. Well, not match exactly, but show you're serious about being part of this." He said it like it was reasonable, like asking me for most of my retirement savings was the same as asking to borrow $20 for lunch. "Marcus, that's almost everything I have saved. That's my retirement account, my emergency fund, everything I've been putting away for 40 years. His jaw tightened, the same expression from earlier. "So you won't help your own son? You'll pay for a wedding and a house, but when I actually need you to invest in my future, you're suddenly broke?" The accusation hung between us like smoke. "I didn't say I wouldn't help. Richard's already committed his portion. He's drawing up the partnership papers, but he wants to know you're serious too. He wants to know you're actually invested in this family's success." The way he said "this family" made it clear he meant Claire's family, the Ashfords, the people with the right last name and the right zip code and the right pedigree. "I am your family," I said quietly, my hands still in the soapy water, plate forgotten. "I'm your father." "Then prove it." He walked away, back to the living room where Richard was probably telling another story about his latest development triumph, or his vintage car collection, or something else designed to remind everyone that he was the kind of man who mattered, and I was the kind who washed dishes. I stood there in the kitchen, hands shaking, water dripping from my fingers onto the tile floor Claire had insisted on importing from Italy. The house was full of noise, laughter from the living room, Tyler's voice asking for another cookie, Christmas music playing from the expensive sound system I'd helped install last month. But I felt completely alone, like I was standing in the ruins of something I'd spent 30 years building and had just watched collapse in an evening. That night I drove home alone to my split level in Elmhurst. The house I'd bought with Sarah in 1989 when Marcus was 3 and we'd needed more space and better schools. The Christmas lights on my neighbors' houses looked cheerful and mocking in equal measure. I sat in my dark living room for a long time, not turning on any lights, just sitting in the chair Sarah used to read in and thinking about how I'd ended up here. 62, widowed, apparently disposable to the son I'd sacrificed everything to raise. Then I opened my laptop. I'd spent 40 years as a civil engineer, designing systems, analyzing data, identifying weak points in structures before they collapsed, planning for contingencies that other people never thought about. I'd built treatment plants that served hundreds of thousands of people, designed fail-safes for catastrophic scenarios, written disaster response protocols that were still being used across 3 states. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was due diligence. It was time to use those skills. I pulled up the documents Marcus had sent me 3 weeks ago when he'd first mentioned the business venture, a 47-page proposal full of projections and market analysis and buzzwords like synergistic opportunities and vertically integrated solutions. Ashford Development Company was listed as the primary partner, contributing expertise and industry connections and the $300,000 that supposedly showed how confident Richard was in the project's success. I started digging. First, the basics. Illinois Secretary of State Business Database, checking Ashford Development's corporate status. Active, filed annually, registered agent at an address in downtown Chicago. So far, everything looked legitimate. Then I moved to Cook County property records, cross-referencing Richard's company with actual holdings. The database showed 8 properties, 3 apartment buildings in Rogers Park, 2 commercial spaces in Pilsen, a mixed-use development in Evanston, and 2 parcels of undeveloped land in the suburbs. Then I checked the liens. Every single property was mortgaged to the maximum, some with multiple loans stacked on top of each other, like a Jenga tower one piece away from collapse. Total debt, $8.7 million against properties worth maybe $6 million in the current market. Richard wasn't building an empire. He was drowning. I kept digging. Court records next. The Illinois court system's public database, searchable by party name. Ashford Development Company appeared in 7 active cases. 4 were routine contract disputes with vendors, 2 were collections actions from unpaid creditors, and 1, filed 8 months ago, currently in discovery, was a lawsuit from 3 investors claiming fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and something called fraudulent conveyance that I had to look up, but basically meant moving assets around to avoid paying debts. The lawsuit was a goldmine of information. I downloaded the complaint and the subsequent filings, 87 pages of allegations, exhibits, depositions. According to the investors, Richard had raised $1.2 million for a development project in Naperville, spent $400,000 of it on consulting fees that went to companies he secretly owned, another $300,000 on personal expenses, including, apparently, the Mercedes, and then declared the project unfeasible and returned only $200,000 to the investors. They were suing for the full amount plus damages. The case was scheduled for trial in February. I cross-referenced the investors' names. One of them, Thomas Brennan, had a LinkedIn profile describing himself as a retired investment banker. His profile also mentioned he'd been involved in several other ventures with Richard Ashford before this one. I searched for their other collaborations and found 2 previous LLCs, both dissolved, both showing similar patterns. Money raised, money spent on vague expenses, projects abandoned, investors left holding worthless equity stakes. By 3 a.m., I had everything. Bank statements I'd found through creative uses of public records and cross-referencing property filings. Court documents showing a pattern of behavior going back 7 years. Email addresses connected to shell companies that existed only on paper. Even some articles from local business journals about controversial developer Richard Ashford and his aggressive financing strategies. He'd done this before. Twice. Both times, his partners lost everything while Richard somehow emerged with new properties in his portfolio and a restructured debt load. The business proposal Marcus had sent me wasn't an opportunity. It was a life raft Richard was building out of my retirement savings, designed to keep him afloat while his empire collapsed around him. I made copies of everything, organized it into a single folder with a table of contents and section dividers, formatted like the technical reports I used to write for clients who needed to understand complex systems. Property lines, court filings, financial statements I'd reconstructed from public records, news articles, everything cross-referenced and sourced, every claim backed by documentation that could be independently verified. Then I sent one email. To Marcus's business attorney, Stephen Pack, the lawyer who'd helped him incorporate last year and whose contact information was in the business proposal Marcus had forwarded. Stephen was careful, thorough, the kind of attorney who actually read contracts instead of just signing them, which was probably why Marcus had hired him. Subject line: Due diligence on Richard Ashford partnership proposal. Urgent review required. I attached the folder, 73 megabytes of documentation, and wrote 3 paragraphs explaining what I'd found. The debt load, the pending fraud lawsuit, the pattern of previous partnerships ending badly, the shell companies, the properties leveraged beyond any reasonable ratio. I ended with one line. Thought you should see this before your client makes an irreversible mistake that could cost him everything he has. I hit send at 3:47 a.m. according to the timestamp. Then I turned off my phone, took 2 Advil for my still throbbing knee, and went to bed. When I woke up at 9:30 the next morning, Boxing Day, gray sky threatening snow, my knee purple and swollen, my phone was exploding with notifications. 47 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from Marcus. The timestamp starting at 7:15 a.m. and getting progressively more frantic. Dad, call me now. Dad, pick up. Where are you? This is an emergency. Please call me back, I'm serious. Dad, I need to talk to you right now. I made coffee first. Slow, deliberate. Ground the beans, measured the water, waited for the machine to heat and brew, the kitchen filling with the smell of something normal and routine, while my phone continued buzzing on the counter like an angry insect. I poured a cup, added cream, took it to the living room and sat in Sarah's chair, the same chair I'd sat in last night, looking out at the gray morning and the neighbors' houses with their Christmas decorations looking shabby in daylight. Finally, at 10:03 a.m., I called him back. "Dad." He was breathless, panicked, his voice high and tight like when he was 8 and had accidentally locked himself in the bathroom. "Where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "Sleeping," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "What's wrong?" "Richard's company, it's—" "Dad, everything's falling apart. The attorney called this morning at 7. Stephen. He showed me documents, financial records, court cases. Richard's bankrupt. He's completely leveraged. There's a fraud lawsuit. He was going to use our business to cover his debts, to move money around, to—" His voice cracked. "We almost lost everything. If we'd signed those partnership papers yesterday like we planned, Dad, we would have been liable for millions in debt. Stephen said we could have been sued personally. Lost the house. Lost everything." I sipped my coffee, watched a cardinal land on the fence in my backyard. "That's terrible," I said, my voice neutral. "Claire's devastated. Her parents are— Richard left town this morning, just packed a bag and drove away. Margaret's been crying all morning. Claire won't come out of the bedroom." There was a pause, the sound of Marcus breathing hard, trying to compose himself. "Stephen said— He said someone sent him all this documentation, pages and pages of research. Someone did a complete forensic analysis of Richard's finances." Silence on the line. The cardinal flew away. "Dad." His voice changed, became quieter. Did you know about this?" I let the question hang there in the space between us, let him work through what he already knew but didn't want to admit. "I did my homework," I said finally, "like I taught you to do before making big decisions. Remember? When you were buying your first car and I showed you how to check the VIN report and the maintenance records? Same principle, just bigger stakes." More silence. I could hear him processing, could almost see the expression on his face as he realized what I'd done and why. "The attorney said someone sent him documents at 3:47 in the morning, 73 megabytes of research, property records, court filings, financial analysis. Was that you?" "Does it matter who sent it?" I asked. "What matters is that you saw it before you signed anything." His breathing changed, steadied. "You saved us. Oh my God, Dad, you saved everything. If we'd signed that partnership agreement—" "No," I interrupted. "I protected my son. Like I always have. Like I did when you were 12 and your mom died and you thought the world was ending. Like I did when you needed college tuition and a wedding and a down payment. That's what fathers do. We protect our children, even when they push us down in front of their in-laws and make us eat at the kids' table." The silence that followed was different, heavier, full of things he wanted to say but didn't know how to start. "Dad, I'm so sorry." His voice broke. "About last night, about the chair, about asking for money, about everything. I've been terrible. Claire's family, they made me feel like you weren't successful enough, weren't important enough, and I started believing it, started treating you like—" He couldn't finish. "I know you are," I said simply. "Sorry, I can hear it. Can we talk, please? Can I come over? I need to apologize properly. I need to explain." I finished my coffee. Set the cup down on the table next to Sarah's chair, the table we'd bought together at an estate sale in 1992. "I'm busy today, Marcus. Doctor's appointment for my knee, the one that's purple and swollen from hitting your floor. We'll talk when I'm ready. Dad, please." "Oh, and Marcus? That $200,000 you asked for? The money you wanted me to invest in Richard's fraud scheme? I'm keeping it. For my retirement. For medical bills. For whatever I want. Because I earned it over 40 years of working and saving and not spending it on German cars and houses with names." "Of course. I understand. I never should have asked. I'm an idiot. Dad, I'm so— Also," I continued, talking over his apology, "I'm spending Christmas at your Aunt Karen's next year. She lives in that little condo in Schaumburg. Doesn't have fancy china or Italian tile, but she doesn't make me sit at the kids' table and she's never pushed me down in front of guests. So that's where I'll be. You're welcome to join me if you'd like. If not, I understand. Silence. Then, I'll be there, I promise. Dad, I'll be wherever you are. I'm so sorry. I love you. I know, I said. Talk to you later, Marcus. I hung up before he could say anything else, before the conversation could turn into reconciliation I wasn't ready for yet, before he could mistake my protection for forgiveness. I sat back in Sarah's chair and smiled. Not a happy smile, exactly, more like satisfaction, the feeling you get when a system you designed works exactly as planned. 47 missed calls because the son who pushed me down finally realized what he'd almost lost. And that his father, the retired engineer he'd dismissed as not successful enough, not impressive enough, not worth a seat at the table, was the only one who'd cared enough to save him.